Hey guys, welcome back. We're here with the SCA with Rita
and Jackson.
And today we're going to tell you guys some more cool stuff about nature. You might remember last week we talked about animal adaptations, those changes that they'll make to their bodies and their behaviors to help them survive. Today we're going to talk about something a little different, and we're going to talk about how plants do something similar.
Hold on, Rita. I remember that a lot of those adaptations were to help animals survive and to find food, but plants don't hunt.
Well, Jackson, you might remember that plants are producers, so they're going to find their food a little bit differently than consumers.
But if animals need to hunt to find food to survive, what do plants do? Why don't you all take a minute to think about that question and maybe discuss it with a classmate or in a breakout session, and we'll think about it too. Oh, okay. So since plants are producers, that means they can produce their own energy from the sun in a process called photosynthesis.
That's right, Jackson. So they don't need teeth and other adaptations that the animals had. They have their own special adaptations that can help them survive. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
I can't wait.
Let's get started.
So now we're going to talk about the parts of the tree, and we're going to start from the bottom up. So to start, we have our roots, and every time we say roots, we want you to stomp your feet because the roots form the base of the tree. They will absorb nutrients and water for the tree to live. They'll also anchor the tree into the ground and protect it from falling over, maybe if there's a strong windstorm. And it'll also even store some of the tree's food. So roots are pretty important for the tree, and they form the base.
So just above the roots is the trunk. And the trunk, every time we say that, I want you all to rub your belly like this, because the trunk is the main part of the tree. The trunk is what provides protective layers for all of the inner parts of the trees and has things inside of it to help move energy up and down the tree. So that's why the trunk is useful.
All right, so now we're going to talk about the crown of the tree. When we talk about the crown, I want you to tap your head. So the crown of the tree is what includes the branches, the leaves, and the flowers. Those branches are what the leaves are going to grow out of, and the leaves are what help create some of the energy from the sunlight for the tree. So when we talk about the crown, I want you to tap your heads. So now I think we should try it all together. So stomp your feet, rub your belly, and tap your head. That's pretty hard. I guess that goes to show how hard trees and other plants have to work in order to survive. So now we are going to talk about photosynthesis, which is how plants are able to make their own energy. Here we have a plant. And you may remember that plants are producers, which means they can make their own food for energy. During photosynthesis, plants take in sunlight and carbon dioxide from their leaves and water from their roots. And with this, they can create sugars, which they use for energy. Through this process, the plants can then release oxygen into the atmosphere. And that is the process of photosynthesis, taking in sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water, and releasing oxygen to create sugars. So this is kind of similar to how people breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide. Plants will do just the opposite. They take in carbon dioxide and release oxygen. Trees are a very important member of every ecosystem, as they add to the atmosphere that we need to survive through photosynthesis.
Hey Rita.
Hey Karina.
So now that we've learned about all the different parts of the tree, I'm a little confused about where to start to identify some of them.
That's a really good point. So the best way to get started is identifying trees into two main groups. We have coniferous and deciduous. So our coniferous trees are going to be the ones that have needles instead of leaves, and they also have cones. So coniferous trees have cones, kind of like pine cones. And then our deciduous trees those ones are the ones that have leaves. The leaves that change colors in the fall and often will fall off during that time. So yeah, that's how you tell the difference between coniferous and deciduous trees.
Wow, that's a great place to start. I can't wait to identify more trees.
Let's go.
So now we are going to point out a few of the trees that we can find here in New Hampshire. So I'm standing next to a couple beech trees right now. And beech trees are known by their smooth gray bark. And in the winter, beech trees will keep on their leaves all through the winter. And that's to help protect the bud, which is where the leaves come out of. So some people like to carve their names into beech trees because of how smooth the bark is. But that makes the bark more likely to get diseases and other insects in it. So that is very bad for the tree and not something you should do.
So now that we've talked a little bit about beech trees and how a great way to identify them is through the leaves that they keep on during the winter, we are going to talk about oak trees, which also keep their leaves on during the winter. And you can see the difference though in identifying them. The leaves are shaped differently. This is the beech tree leaf and this is the oak tree leaf. And they're shaped differently. Also, the beech tree leaf will be a lighter shade than the oak tree. So they're slightly different colors and slightly different shapes. So those are how you can tell between oak trees and beech trees in the winter time. But another cool identifier for oak trees is that if you look at your feet, you might see acorns. And oak trees produce acorns, which are very similar to a conifer's pine cones, and they provide the seeds to grow more oaks. So this is just another of the common deciduous trees you can find in New Hampshire.
So here we have a paper birch. A paper birch is actually New Hampshire's state tree. They're pretty easy to identify because of their white color and because of their bark, which peels off very easily, kind of like paper. And it actually does that on the live trees. So paper birch actually has quite a few different uses. We often use it to start fires, like in our wood stoves, and they're often used to make things like toothpicks and popsicle sticks. All right, so here we have a maple tree. You guys might know the maple tree from where we get our delicious maple syrup. If you look around a lot of New Hampshire, you'll see these big trees with buckets connected to them. That's actually how we get the syrup from the trees and make it into maple syrup that we'll later eat. One way that you can tell a maple from other trees is that they will be the first to grow flowers in the springtime. However, since it's still winter, we have to use a different way to identify this tree. The way that we can do that is with the branching patterns. As you can see, here is our trunk, and here are the branches. They're growing from the exact same spot on the trunk. That is called opposite branching patterns. So you can see here, the branches will grow from the exact same spot on the trunk. All of the other deciduous trees that we've talked about today have had alternating branching patterns, which means that the branches will grow from different parts of the trunk.
All right, so now we are going to talk about coniferous trees. And so while deciduous trees have leaves and often have acorns, coniferous trees have needles and they also have cones. And coniferous trees are also usually evergreen trees. So any tree that means they stay green all through the winter. So this specific one here is a white pine. And you can tell a white pine because each of these bundles of needles here, I'm holding one in my hand, has 5 different needles in it. And just like white has 5 letters, the white pines have 5 needles per bundle. So you can see here, this large section of growth, and this is 1 year's worth of growth for a white pine. So every section of branches goes up 1 year. And you can see these tall white pines all around us can be as old as 100 years old.
So now that we've talked a little bit about how to identify white pines, we're going to show you a red pine. And red pines have a couple of different ways to identify them with. One is their needles. So red pines have longer needles than white pines, and they're much more tough. And they also come in bundles of 2. So there'll be 2 needles in one bundle. Another way that you can identify red pine is by the bark. You can see that this bark has kind of a red color to it, and that's another way to remember the name and to know what this tree is. The only thing about the red pine is that there is an insect that has been kind of coming after this tree, and it's called the red pine scale. And this insect has been moving through these trees and killing them, so that a lot of the red pines you might see around here might be dying or dead, but you can still see them, and they are really straight trees, and they tend to look like telephone poles.
All right, so here I am standing next to a couple of hemlock trees. As you can see, they're growing right on the rocks and right next to the marsh. So the reason for that is that hemlock is a generalist species, meaning they can grow pretty much anywhere. However, they do tend to like maybe a wetter, cooler spot to grow. So hemlocks, like we mentioned, are coniferous trees, which means they don't lose their leaves in the wintertime, and they have little cones like this. One way to identify a hemlock, other than the fact that it does have these needles, is on the bottom, there's a little silver line on the bottom of the needle, and that's how you can tell that it's a hemlock.
Rita, we learned about so much today, starting with the different parts of a tree, like the roots and the trunk and the crown.
Yeah, and we also learned about photosynthesis, remember? How the trees in their leaves will take in sunlight and carbon dioxide, and their roots will take in water, and that's how they make their energy.
We learned about 7 different kinds of trees: the beech, the oak, the paper birch, the maple, the white pine, the red pine, and the hemlock.
Right, and how some of those trees are deciduous, meaning they have leaves, and some are coniferous, which means they have needles.
Wow, Rita, that is pretty cool. I cannot wait to get started identifying trees.
Thanks, Jackson and Rita. Now, before you guys get going outside to identify some trees, we have some journal questions for you to answer. So we have 2 questions for this week. The first one is, what is your favorite thing to do with trees? The second one is, why are trees important to you? Just take 5 minutes to answer these questions, and then go ahead and get outside to try and identify some trees. I hope you all have a tree-rific week.